So a warm welcome to you all. We're just going to run through this afternoon some of the important changes that are affecting us with regards to anyone really who supports the induction process from September 2024. Hannah will this afternoon outline the changes in some of the roles and responsibilities of all of those stakeholders that support induction. So whether you're a head teacher, currently an induction mentor, or previously been an external verifier, and she'll tell us a little bit about the new role of validators. We'll also go through some of the important the professional learning offer that's available to NQTs, and not just when they're NQTs, when they move into that early career period. So Hannah will outline that. And obviously, most importantly, probably for some of you, we'll talk you through the changes in the funding arrangements for anyone who supports NQT induction as we move forward to the sort of autumn term 2024. So without further ado, thanks, Hannah. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Deb. So we're going to start today's session really by looking at the changes that have already come into place in terms of induction. So if you cast your mind back a couple of years, you'll remember there was a consultation set out and some changes were then implemented in 2022, which related to the minimum number of sessions that an NQT needs to complete before they're eligible for a result. So there's some flexibility now in the system in terms of when that result can be given, in terms of when those NQTs have shown progress towards the standards and they're ready to pass through the induction process. There was also a 5-year time frame introduced, so the NQTs now have 5 years from gaining their QTS in which to complete induction, or if they gained their QTS before November 22, when these new regulations came in, they've got 5 years from November 22 to get that induction process completed. So NQT induction can also take place in pupil referral units now. We've had a number of NQTs go through successfully completing induction in those settings. There are then some additional changes that will now be coming in from September 2024, and these will be applicable to all NQTs that are starting the induction process at this point in time, so from September. So the way in which we've structured today's session is we're going to give you the headlines that capture all of the changes, and then we're going to take you through step by step each role and responsibility and the impact those changes will have, and pause for questions as we go through. So if there is anything you'd like to ask, please do come in at those question points, and it'd be great to hear your voices. So if we go on to the next slide, what you'll see in terms of the changes that are coming in September are that all NQTs in Wales will now be supported by an induction mentor. So that's no change really for those NQTs that are going to be employed within our schools, but there is a change for those on supply because they will also have an induction mentor. The induction mentor for supply teachers will be allocated in the same way previously external verifiers would have been allocated, but the role of the external verifier will no longer be present in the induction process. In terms of quality assurance, there'll be a new role created, and that will be the role of the validator. And a validator will sample a selection of NQTs across the region, approximately 50%, and they will QA the induction process. So the deployment of validators will be flexible and they may not stay with the same NQT for the entirety of the induction process, because if they have QA'd and they fed that back and everything is going well and that induction mentor is providing all of the support they should be, then hopefully that NQT is having a successful experience in induction and the validator may be redeployed elsewhere across the region. In terms of funding, the Education Workforce Council will still release the funding to support all streams of induction support. So that covers the NQT, the induction mentor and the validator. And that will be released to schools termly in the same way it currently is. And then the big change in terms of how our induction mentors will support NQTs and in terms of the expectations on NQTs is the change to the number and the development of the PLEs. So they'll no longer be required to complete the 10 to 20 professional learning experiences. Instead, they'll complete 2 professional inquiry projects over the course of their induction period. There has been a pilot run across Wales, and some of our NQTs and the EAS have been part of that. They've trialled this approach and the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. It's building on their experience of inquiry and research from initial teacher education and then across the wider educational landscape in terms of where inquiry sits. And it provides a really holistic way for our NQTs to reflect and develop their own practice in a very bespoke way to their own needs. So what we're going to do now is take you through each of those in a little bit more detail and in terms of what they mean for the stakeholders that support induction. So we're going to start with our head teachers. Oh, sorry, we jumped to validators. There we go, head teachers. We're going to start with the head teachers. So in terms of supporting NQT induction within your settings, you'll need to ensure that every school is NQT ready. Now, we know staffing can be very flexible, it can be very fluid. Even if you don't have an NQT starting with you in September, there may well be an opportunity at some point through the academic year where an NQT will come through either on supply, long-term supply, or covering a short-term contract. And you will need to be able to be in a position to provide that trained induction mentor support. So we are asking all schools to have that nominated trained induction mentor ready to support any NQT that may come into the setting. And then the head teacher is responsible for ensuring that that regular mentoring support is happening. So time and space is provided to undertake those mentoring activities. And in addition, that 10% non-contact time is scheduled, and that can be, up to you as a school how that is allocated, but it must be allocated and it can be used to cover, support for accessing the national or local professional learning offer for NQTs and all activities undertaken in terms of relating to the induction process. So the role for the head teacher there in terms of overseeing that induction process and the professional learning required to support it. Then in terms of the validators on the next slide, so this is the new role now that has been created within the induction process. And I can see in the chat, yes, we will be sharing the presentation and there will be a sharing of the recording as well. So you will have access to this following the session. So in terms of validators, they, like I said, are going to be the new role within the induction process. If we could go on to the next slide, please, Deb. And the validators are going to quality assure the induction process. So you will be, as a validator, allocated to an NQT. But if you are an NQT in the system, your first point and your main point of contact for any questions, for all your support, will be your induction mentor. The validators, although they will appear named on the induction profile of the NQTs they're allocated to, will very much work with the mentor within that school to quality assure the process. So they will be sampling the targets, the development priorities and the reviews. They'll be checking that that 10% time has been allocated, that professional learning has been accessed, professional dialogue has been had to support the new inquiry project approach, and QAing the whole induction process and then signposting to any additional PL or support that may be required. So be that for a new induction mentor maybe that could do with accessing some additional support in terms of the induction mentor development programme or some additional professional learning for the NQTs, the validator will have a role in supporting perhaps where there are any gaps or additional needs for support. As we've said already, the deployment of validators is at the discretion of the AB and the induction lead officer, and they will be deployed to the NQTs, like I said, initially linked to their profile. But if once those QA activities have been undertaken and that support is good in that setting by the induction mentor and the NQT is on track, they may then be redeployed to go and sample elsewhere or to an NQT or mentor that is in need of some additional support. So that it's a very flexible role and you will not necessarily stay with the same IM or NQT throughout the whole induction process. Same way in which our old EV system used to work. So validators will need to complete an application form to register their details so that these can be shared with the EWC and we can set up you the appropriate access in terms of logging into your EWC account and being able to view the NQTs that have been allocated to you. So at the end of the session today, we'll be sharing that link for you to be able to register. And then there will be an expectation that our validators attend the briefing session in the autumn term that will run through in detail what we expect throughout the induction process, and examples of the inquiry projects from the pilot this year will be shared, so you have everything you need in order to be able to QA the process. The funding will be released directly from the EWC to schools, and it is £400 per term per NQT that is supported. Okay, so if we go on to the next slide, we can see that the funding, like I said, will be allocated termly. If you are a head teacher within a school that has an NQT, you will be informed if a validator has been allocated to them. And we will then work with the induction mentor within your setting to arrange the QA of that process and provide any support required. And again, like I said, that will be flexible. So if you are notified, they might not stay with you for the entirety of the induction process. We are looking to provide a 50% sample, but we know within our region, we usually have around 300 NQTs. So once we have our lists in autumn and we know how many NQTs there are, they're usually not spread, as you'd imagine, over 300 schools, because large secondaries, for example, employ a number of NQTs. So we're hoping that throughout an induction period, every school that is supporting an NQT would have a validator allocated at some point through that induction process. So that's our aim to try and achieve. Until we get our numbers, we won't know for certain exactly how that model is going to look, but we do hope that every school supporting an NQT would have that QA role of validator allocated at some point through that induction process. So we'll be looking to recruit validators, and we'd really like to work with members of staff that have previously been induction mentors, external verifiers or external mentors, so you have that understanding of the induction process. And like I said, there need to be that flexibility in terms of which NQTs are being supported. And then there'll be regular meetings once a term for validators to feedback their QA processes. And at that point, we can have that conversation around if a school has completed what they need to do, and therefore that validator no longer needs to go in and QA and can be moved elsewhere, or if there's more support that's required, we can look to initiate that as well. So in terms of professional learning for validators, I have said you will all need to attend that briefing session in the autumn term, which will run through the roles and responsibilities. We'll provide the registration link at the end of the session today, so you can register your interest in becoming a validator. And then there will be those termly sessions to provide updates regarding your QA work and any additional support that will be required. Okay, I'm going to stop there and pause for any questions. So is there any questions at all in terms of the roles we've shared so far relating to validators or head teachers? Yeah, Jen, I see you've got your hand up. Oh, you're on mute, sorry, Jen.
It's always the same, isn't it?
Okay.
Thanks, Hannah. Just to clarify then, so the funding for the validator is for the NQTs they work with. So is that right? So if they worked with 2 NQTs, they'll have 2 lots of £400, 3 NQTs,
yes.
and so on. So
yeah, the same way for the EV funding. Yeah.
Okay. So if you were assigned an NQT who needed quite a lot of support, you could potentially be with them for quite a long period of time. You get the same amount of funding as if you would be a total of £400. But if you went to an NQT that was on track, getting the right support, you'd tick them off, great, move on to another, you may see 3 NQTs, which will be £1,200. So have I got that right? So in terms of equity and funding, how does that work?
So they would be termly cut off. And it will become clear, I think, when we go through the role in more detail in terms of what a validator would need to look at. So really, we'll be looking at changing validators. We think at the moment possibly on a termly basis, unless there were exceptional circumstances whereby moves were needed. So because of the activities you would need to undertake, you wouldn't be able to do that in a shortened period of
Fine.
time, because you would need to
Okay.
check certain points during the induction process.
Okay.
So I don't think a minimum would almost be the term, which is why the funding is termly, because then you would, obviously, if you
Yeah.
continue, you'd have that second term's worth of funding, or you would go to a different NQT, whereby you would have that £400 to support that different NQT and pick up the process from that point.
That
So we
makes
see the
more
equity
sense.
being in that sense of how the role will work. And sorry, that will become more clear, I think, when we go through the actual expectations of what the validator would need to do in terms of that QA role and how it's
Well,
broken down.
I think, Hannah, it's also important to say that the validator is not the same as the EV. I
It's
think
not, no.
what you
Yeah.
alluded to there, Jen, was how the old EV used to be. So there was an element of potluck, actually, because if you were an EV of a NQT that needed increased support, it didn't always follow that there was increased funding.
No.
Whereas this is a different role. This isn't the
Okay.
same as EV role.
Okay.
And I think the quality assurance, there's a very important but perhaps more subtle shift to actually the responsibility to supporting that NQT has to now sit, I think, even more importantly with the induction mentor. All of that
Absolutely.
increased support sits with the role of the school-based induction mentor. So we've seen a shift, if you like, in terms of the raised importance of everyone having a really good understanding of the importance of a school-based induction mentor as we move forward.
Okay.
So I think that will probably, as Hannah said, become a little bit more clearer.
Perfect. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Okay, are there any other questions at all? And we will provide opportunity as well to pause as we go through. So if anything, if you do think of any questions, please do ask again as we go through. So that takes us quite nicely really into the next section, which is going to be looking at the role of the induction mentor. And as Deb has alluded to, this really is a pivotal role in terms of the induction support. It's why we mentioned right at the start in terms of the head teacher's responsibility to ensure their mentors are trained, the right person is selected for the role, and time is provided for them to undertake these mentoring activities, because they will be the ones that are responsible for providing that regular support to the NQTs. So as well as undertaking, as they would have done in the past, all of those developmental priorities setting, their reviews, their lesson observations, they are going to be the main and only point of contact for those NQTs. So they will be asking them for support with their inquiry projects. They will be providing lesson observations and working with the NQT, and they will be the one that makes that final review and recommendation at the end of that induction period. Now, the change will come here where we will be inviting our induction mentors to attend the moderation of profiles now, because they will be the ones ultimately making that judgment call at the end of the induction period about whether that NQT is ready for a pass result. So that will be a professional learning opportunity for our mentors. And as we go on to the next slide, you'll see we've got a whole range now of professional learning opportunities for our induction mentors, recognising the fact that they are going to really be the pivotal role here in terms of providing that induction support. So they should all attend the induction mentor briefing that is held in the autumn term. This will provide examples of the pilot professional inquiry projects that have been run, so we can talk them through the process and the structure and how best to support the NQTs with this new approach. We'll also give all of the other information we've always shared in terms of timeframes, when lesson observations can be completed, how to access the profiles if they're new to the role, and all that wraparound support to be able to undertake the role of mentor effectively. There's also still running our National Induction Mentor Development Programme, and this will again really unpick how you can best support your NQTs with the professional inquiry projects, with that day-to-day mentoring, that regular mentoring support, and having those professional dialogues with your NQT. Like we said, the moderation sessions will then be held for induction mentors to attend, as they are the ones that will be making that final review and recommendation. And if there are any concerns that an IM has around either progress relating to NQT induction or any of the process itself, please do get in contact with their validator if they have one allocated, or if not, myself, and we'll be able to support at every point through the induction process. So again, we'll be sharing all of this information with our IMs with our validators and our NQTs at all the briefing sessions in much more detail in the autumn term and running through in detail each role and responsibility. But we wanted to give you today an overview of each of the roles and how they support each other throughout the induction process. So what you can see from this is that the IM role is going to be really, really valuable in terms of that support that it provides to our NQTs. And then the head's role in terms of making sure then that they have that time to really provide that mentoring support to the NQTs within this setting. And similarly for the supply teachers, the IM will also have to work with them to provide that mentoring support on a regular basis. So having meetings to discuss their inquiry projects. And again, we will share with you all, the supply examples of what those inquiry projects look like from the pilots that have run and how best to support our supply teachers through the induction process as well. So I'm just going to stop and pause a moment again there. Has anybody got any questions about that induction mentor role? Yeah, I see Brindero got a hand up. Hello.
Hi, just wondering if there's a sort of ballpark figure in terms of amount of time that would be the expected amount of time that an IM should be given, whether it would be different to what was being expected in the past or whether you would expect a similar amount of time under the new system.
I think where it's done well, it's a similar amount of time in that there are still the same number of development priorities, there's still the same number of reviews, and we would expect a termly lesson observation. But within that, it will be guided then by the professional dialogue around the inquiry projects, and you will know how regular you're able to provide that. So certainly NQTs in terms of shaping their inquiry will need support at the start. There'll be then check-in points in terms of how that inquiry is going, their reflections. So there'll need to be key professional dialogue built in then between those sort of rigid professional development priority and review dates that would form part of the profile and when you would upload your lesson observations. Okay. And I can see Karis got a hand up as well. No, is that anyone from Casnawydd want to come in there? Or is that legacy hand maybe?
No, sorry,
no.
I did have a question. And I'm not
That's
sure
okay.
whether you've already answered this, but it's to do with, so previously an EV would take over a supply if somebody was on long-term supply or just generally supply teachers. So what would happen? I know if every school has an IM, how would that work if there was a supply that went from school that went to more than one school within 1 week?
Yeah, so good question. So the system is essentially similar in terms of that, so that an supply teacher, instead of being allocated an external verifier, will be allocated an induction mentor. So every NQT has the same induction mentor. The difference comes in that if they're in a school, obviously their induction mentor is from the same school that they work in, and it's named on their EWC induction notification form in the same way it would be now. The induction mentor, if they're on supply, is allocated in the same way we would have previously allocated an external verifier. So the NQT will log themselves with the EWC as a supply teacher, will be notified, and then anyone that's registered to become an induction mentor for supply teachers will be allocated then a number of NQTs to support, and you would get that notification in the same way you used to as an EV. The similar pattern then, if the NQT is on day-to-day supply, that IM is their main point of contact, and you would support them in the same way an old external mentor would have in terms of providing, development priorities, reviews, lesson observations, but there would be more of an emphasis as well on that mentoring side, so making sure they have a similar experience to those employed in school in terms of being able to ask about their inquiry projects. And like I said, we'll share the supply examples that we've got from our pilot so they can structure them, and providing that mentoring support. If then that day-to-day supply turns into long-term supply and it's the same as it was previously, so anything over 11 days in one setting is categorised as long-term supply, the school then have a responsibility to send off their induction notification form and take over the role of the induction mentor. So they would then take over that role until the point at which the supply, that long-term supply, came to an end. And then depending on, the next move of that NQT, whether they return to day-to-day supply or whether they got employment in another setting, it would depend where the IM support would come from then moving forward. Does that make sense? Is that?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions at all about the role of the IM? No? Okay, so we will move on then, and we're going to go on to the newly qualified teachers themselves now. So these changes are coming into force in September, and they're for any NQT starting the induction process. So the NQTs coming through will be no longer expected to write those PLEs, but they will now be completing a more hopefully holistic approach in terms of 2 professional inquiry projects, looking at the 5 standards and building on their development priorities that have been set and their lesson observations to form that holistic picture of how they can develop in an area of practice that's been identified, and then reflect on that and implement any changes to support their own development and hopefully have a really positive impact on themselves in their practice and the learners in which they're supporting as well. So that's the aim. It builds on all the skills they will have developed through similar projects throughout their ITE courses, and also in terms of embedding that research and inquiry approach that we know is so prevalent in education at the moment. So it'll be giving them that skill to continually reflect on their own practice and action any areas for development moving forward. Now, like I said, similarly, in all validators, IMs and NQTs will be shown examples during the briefing sessions of all the pilot inquiry projects that we've had, and it is very bespoke to them in terms of how they structure this. We will be recommending that they start their first inquiry project in the autumn term, and that is completed by mid-spring term, and then they start their second in mid-spring term, and it's completed by the summer. But we know by the nature of the pilot and by the nature of the individuality of these inquiry projects that some may be shorter, some may be longer, and some may need to revisit them as they go through, because actually what they're looking at and what they're collecting, their resources around is going to take a longer period of time. So there is flexibility there to revisit, to build on the first inquiry through the second inquiry that may throw up questions they want to look at. Okay, so there's lots of opportunity for this to be very bespoke to our NQTs in terms of developing their own practice. And like I said, during all the briefing sessions, we will provide a lot of scaffold and support to induction mentors on how to best support their NQTs throughout this process and to the NQTs themselves as well. So if we can just go on to the next slide for me, Deb, thank you. So in terms of the professional learning to support our NQTs and to support into early career, it's quite similar to how it was last year in the sense of it will start in term 1 with the national sessions. The first 2 national sessions will be run online. The first one focusing on the process and how they access their induction profile and all the practical things they need to be able to navigate induction. The second will very much focus on the professional inquiry projects, how to structure them, some ideas around questions and supporting them in terms of the process. The remaining national sessions then are held in our EAS partner schools, covering the nationally agreed content and providing an opportunity to link that theory and practice. There will also be an opportunity for an in-person NQT network meeting to meet their peers across the region and collaborate in that first term. This is then followed by the local NQT and early career teacher offer with a real focus around pedagogy and live practice held in our partner schools and reflecting on what they've seen and observed and how that can impact on their own practice. Again, with that opportunity of a network meeting to provide that collaborative element and support from peers across the region. And then as we go into term 3 and beyond into their early career, there's an opportunity for a real bespoke professional learning offer there. So depending on how their inquiries have gone, their areas for development, the NQTs and early career teachers will be able to look at that PL offer and really select the most bespoke elements for them in terms of where they'd like to progress, and show that support in terms of professional learning in a certain area. And again, there'll be networks available in whichever area they look to develop to support them to collaborate with peers across the region. So we will be sharing dates later today. We've got dates set for all of our briefing sessions in the first term, and we'll be able to get those out to you because I know diaries get very busy. So hopefully we'll be able to get those booked in for all stakeholders to attend the relevant briefing sessions. Just on the next slide now, just to note in terms of continuation. So for those NQTs that are already in our system, that have started the induction process, they will continue using the guidance that was published at the time their induction commenced. So they won't be expected to complete the professional inquiry projects. They will continue completing their PLEs if they've already started on that process. The only change for them will come in terms of the EV, because the EVs will not continue into next academic year. So they will have the support of an induction mentor, either in their school setting, which probably wouldn't change. If they're on supply, we'll be writing out to all of our EVs and EMs that are currently supporting supply teachers to ask them if they would be willing to take on the role of induction mentor next year for supply teachers to keep that consistency for the NQTs that are going to continue with their induction. So hopefully the same person would continue to provide that support for them wherever possible. So that's the continuation of NQTs in the system. So again, I'm just going to pause before we go on to the funding arrangements and see if there's any questions relating to the NQTs role. No? I know it's an awful lot of information, so you will have access to the PowerPoint after, and if there's any questions that come up on reflection of what you've heard today, please do contact us. So moving on then, in terms of funding arrangements, I know this is always the burning question in terms of, how we can fund this and how we can make this model work. The funding will stay the same in the way it's allocated, so it will be retrospective at the end of a term from the EWC directly to schools. It's really important here that schools are sending off their induction notification forms quickly as soon as they employ an NQT, and then at the end of each term, the claim forms are sent off in a timely manner to release that funding to schools, or at the end of an employment of an NQT if that comes before the end of term. So the funding for the NQTs is the same. It's £900 per term per NQT for a school that's employing NQTs, and the induction mentor role is funded at £400 per term per NQT supported. So the validator role is also funded at £400 per term per NQT, and I think we went into that a little bit earlier in terms of how that funding will work. So it's a very similar model in terms of how the funding is allocated and how it's released. If you are an induction mentor supporting supply teachers, please do encourage them to continue to log their sessions with the EWC. In the same way we ask our schools to send off the forms in a timely manner, the supply teachers logging their sessions in a timely manner will ensure the funding is released to the IMs because they're actively undertaking induction, and therefore we can make sure the EWC release that funding for the support that's been provided retrospectively over that term. Okay, just going to pause there again. Are there any questions relating to funding at all? Okay, well, we are moving on to the last part of the session today. And we're just going to spend the last part just sort of talking about if there were concerns around progress. So currently we have the cause for concern process, and this process will stay with the changes. So if you ever have any concerns around the progress an NQT is making, the first step would be that professional dialogue between the NQT, the IM and the head teacher, and that school level action plan would be initiated, which is in addition to the development priorities set on the profile. So where they would be broken down into smaller, smarter targets with shorter timeframes and identified clearly the support that will be put in place so that NQT has the opportunity to make that progress. If after review of that there is still limited progress, do get in contact with Deb and myself then, and we'll make sure a validator is assigned if they're not already, to support then with the formal level cause for concern if that would be the next step. There is a staged process here whereby we would have a meeting with all stakeholders, explain the areas for development and the concerns that have been raised, and then put into place a detailed plan with clear timeframes and support in terms of the next steps that are required. There would be a formal letter then sent following that meeting outlining everything that had been discussed and in terms of the areas for development. And that's when the induction mentor would then press the cause for concern button on the profile and the plan would come into force and we'd start that support network then and that support plan. But if you do have any concerns around progress, please do get in contact with us and we'll be able to talk you through each step. So I did say we'd share with you the application form. So we really would like anyone that's currently an EV or an EM or an IM experienced in school to have a think about if they would like to take on the role of induction mentor, supporting supply teachers, and or become a validator within the system. So please do share this with any staff members you think might be interested. Like I said, we will be using this as an opportunity to update all of our EWC records. So we will be sharing your information with them and creating new induction mentor for supply teachers lists and validator lists. So your old EV sort of information then will be removed and you'll be placed onto one of these lists if you'd like to continue. So the application form is on this page for the supply teachers, and on the following slide, we've got the validators application form then as well. And like I said, we will run through in detail the role of both during the briefing sessions in the autumn. So that has brought us to the end of the session today. Like I said, if you do have any questions, it'd be lovely to hear from you. But if not, and you think of something after, please don't hesitate to contact us. And we'll be happy to support with any questions that you have.
Well, thanks, Hannah. Thanks. Lots of information as we promised right at the start. Some significant changes there. But like Hannah said, if you've got any questions or queries, either now or as we go through the process, please let us know. Yes, Becky, of course, will share all the slides and the video recording with everyone. No problem. So thanks for joining us today. If we have yeah, we can pop those in the chat for you, and we'll try and get the PowerPoints out to you ASAP as well. So thanks very much for all your time, and we'll hang on if anyone has got any questions that they want to chat through with us individually. But other than that, diolch yn fawr iawn.
Hannah, can I just ask you a quick